Thank you all for joining us. We're going to get started. My name is Adam Nelson. I'm the Director of International Strategy at the American Alliance of Museums. AAM's international mission is to foster cross-cultural understanding between museums in the U.S. and around the world in the areas of standards, best practices, thought leadership, and community engagement to foster excellence and promote the value of museums to society. We're so lucky today to have Elizabeth Silks speak to you from the International Coalition of Sites of Conscience. The International Coalition of Sites of Conscience are sites, individuals, and initiatives activating the power of places of memory to engage the public in connecting the past and present in order to envision and shape a more just and humane future. Their members consist of more than 185 institutions across the globe, from long-standing historic sites to emerging memory initiatives. As Executive Director of the International Sites of Conscience, Elizabeth guides the strategic growth and direction of the organization's presence in more than 55 countries. Elizabeth will be speaking about creating opportunities for engaged dialogue and community involvement, exploring the ways in which museums can create transformative spaces by connecting what happens within exhibitions to events and experiences taking place outside the museum's walls. Elizabeth's presentation will be followed by a short Q&A session. Please join me in welcoming Elizabeth Silks.
Thank you, Adam, and thank you, AAM, for inviting me to be a part of Museum Talks. It's an absolute pleasure to be here and be able to speak with you today. Let's start by imagining. Imagine a former guard and former prisoner come together to discuss what brought them to those positions 3 decades ago, to share how they feel today about those past roles, and explore whether there could possibly be any commonalities in their experiences. High school students bring desperately needed food to a family of survivors who, many years after the atrocity they lived through, are still struggling to find the resources to make it through every day. A 12-year-old girl is interviewing her grandmother about her experiences as a refugee, hearing the story for the first time, recording it for inclusion in an archive, and deciding at that very moment to work for peace in her community so that no one else will have to go through that trauma. A woman who had traveled with her husband across a continent in order to find a living wage, only to have her husband killed in the mine in which he was working, along with hundreds of his countrymen, speaks out today against rising xenophobia in a city that has begun to cast all immigrants as threats. Let's think about where these conversations could take place. What spaces are trusted enough to bring victim and perpetrator together, agile enough to determine and then develop ways to meet community needs, creative enough to engage multiple generations year after year. Museums, historic sites, and memorials. And these are but 4 examples in Russia, Cambodia, Bangladesh, and Belgium of programs at Sites of Conscience, sites that have made the choice to move from places of passive learning to dynamic centers for engagement and action. They might remember very different histories, tragedy and triumph, from conflict and atrocity to the slave trade, to the struggle for civil rights, the voices of the Arab Spring. And they might be working in very different contexts, but Sites of Conscience share a common goal: to use the power of their stories to connect past and present and shape a rights-based future. Often moving beyond inspiring change, Sites of Conscience are transforming communities through their programs. What does this transformation look like? Let's first hear what a Site of Conscience is from the perspective of our members from Egypt, Tunisia, Nepal, and France.
Sites of conscience are places in which atrocities happened, human rights violations occurred, or places that have been built to memorize such the victims and all that they have been through.
Site of conscience is a vibrant memory.
For the families of the disappeared and their home, and it can be the sites of conscience to them to remember their disappeared loved ones, and also they can remember at their places every day. So it's everyday memory.
Site of conscience mean my inner return to my inner depth, to not only understand what is happening to the humanity around me, but also to be part of the way we are going to look forward.
So vibrant memory, a return to our inner humanity, part of the way we move forward. Visitors to sites of conscience have the opportunity to connect with the past through the lens of personal experience in a way that begins to bridge difference and chip away at the notion of the other. Through interactive programs and facilitated dialogue, sites of conscience invite visitors to move from the individual story to a shared narrative and ultimately collective action. Sites of conscience with dynamic dialogue programs often find that their communities begin to look to these spaces, their exhibits and classrooms, their vestibules and gardens, even their outreach buses and websites as vital connectors so that new understanding and lasting positive change can take hold. But how are they doing this? Let's take a look at a few examples of programs that are catalyzing change. The first is the Gulag Museum at Perm 36 in Russia. It's the only former Gulag that today is open as a museum. Their signature programs include the dialogue I mentioned earlier, the dialogue programs with political prisoners, former prisoners, as well as former guards. They have a week-long arts and civic engagement program, Pilorama, focused on promoting freedom of expression, freedom of speech. They also host the Summer School of Museology, which brings together museum professionals from across Russia to talk about how to tell difficult histories when working in a hostile environment. As the current administration in Russia lashes out at the most effective change agents, Perm 36 is finding themselves front and center, trying to do all they can to continue their programs on free expression online when they're unable to carry them out at their site. Youth for Peace in Cambodia. In Cambodia, there remains deep silence and tremendous shame among survivors of the Khmer Rouge regime. Very few avenues for healing and reconciliation. The tribunals that are taking place in Cambodia have very limited scope, and very few perpetrators are in fact being held accountable. Youth for Peace is working to change that and to provide new avenues for healing. In addition to intergenerational dialogue programs and arts and memory programs, Youth for Peace also offer youth participants the chance to decide how they would like to address the needs of their community. The youth in the past have very often selected a family of survivors in their own community, struggling financially, and they commit to providing food and shelter, clothing to this family for a full year. The goal is to ensure that the stories are kept alive, to offer dignity and respect to those who are still struggling to move forward. Liberation War Museum in Bangladesh. Liberation War Museum was founded about 10 years ago in Dhaka. It was not founded by museum professionals. It was founded by former freedom fighters from the Liberation War of 1971. Today, the museum is known as the People's Museum, as the country of Bangladesh takes ownership over all of the programs that are carried out at this site. Although the War of 1971 is remembered, the museum in fact promotes tolerance and pluralism. They teach the Universal Declaration of Human Rights through extraordinary education programs, both in the urban center of Dhaka as well as in rural communities. What you see here is a picture of the mobile bus Liberation War Museum, about 5 years ago, launched a mobile program so that they could reach the rural communities where the children don't have a chance to come into Dhaka, learn about the war, and learn about the human rights programs at the site. You'll see there the gentleman in the middle is Tariq Ali. He's a former freedom fighter. Tariq and his colleagues will go out with the mobile bus, will speak to groups of school students. They will explore the history of the Liberation War. They will explore the Universal Declaration of Human Rights. And then Tariq will explain how to gather an oral history, go through the steps and encourage the students to interview elders in their community, interview grandparents, their aunts, their uncles, and ask them about their experiences during the Liberation War. Then the students write down on the sheet of paper the museum gives them. They record this oral history and send it into the museum. It becomes part of a formal oral archive, a formal written archive. To date, the Liberation War Museum has collected over 17,000 oral archives from school children across the country. Le Bois du Casier in Belgium is the site of a former mine. In 1956, there was an explosion in the mine killing all of the workers. 262 immigrant laborers died. These laborers were from 12 different countries. More than half of them were Italian. Today, Le Bois du Casier focuses on programs that raise awareness of workers' rights, immigrants' rights, and begin to address the issue of rising xenophobia across Belgium and across the continent. The Memorial of the Resistance in Sao Paulo, Brazil. The Memorial of the Resistance is a former police headquarters. During the military dictatorship, it was a site of torture and detention, and today it is open as a museum where former prisoners lead the tours. There are extraordinary programs such as this one. I'm going to show a short video about this program, 436. This 3-minute video shows the changes in visitors as they begin to process the 436 confirmed deaths and disappearances during the Brazilian dictatorship, through the creation of masks representing each victim. You'll see the visitors join the artist, Alexandra Danieli, to co-create, in silence, a mask that represents a victim. The mask will have a blue label for people who remain missing, or a red for the confirmed dead, with the full name of one of the victims. As you'll see, the visitors initially join the process smiling and open. And by the end, you'll note that they seem to be feeling the weight of what they've just understood, their connection to the victims on a personal and very emotional level. These are just a few of the 200 Sites of Conscience programs underway around the world. I've highlighted global programs here, as you might not be aware of their work, but there are extraordinary programs underway here in the U.S. Many of you are probably quite familiar with them, and many of them are presenting on panels over the course of the next few days, so I encourage you to attend presentations. Just a few of the U.S. sites doing extraordinary programs include Jane Addams Hull House, Levine Museum of the New South, Matilda Jocelyn Gage Foundation, Eastern State Penitentiary, Wing Luke Museum, Abbey Museum, Moifa Gallery of Conscience, and others. In closing, I will note that the performer Alexandre Danieli said, in describing why he created 436, in the Brazilian culture, forgetting is very present. The idea here is to provoke the audience to remember or to know these subjects, so that rather than faces forgotten, they are people who had a family, a story, and are part of the lives of everyone today. This is what Sites of Conscience are doing as well, serving to remind us all that in finding new ways to connect to the stories of those who came before, we're laying the foundation for those who will come after us. Thank you.